I thought it would be a good idea for us to remind ourselves of why we are here together. Hey, Ruth, being that you're up, could you shut that door for me, please? Oh, you're coming to do that. Ruth, you're all right. Do you know that every Sunday morning before anyone gets here, Ruth shows up and makes coffee and gets things ready every Sunday morning? Ruth, thank you. That's good. That's awesome. I think that's so great. And I know that our people have been signing up to clean the sanctuary and has been vacuuming pretty faithfully. So thank you for that. Look at that man smile when I say that. Papa John is happy to hear that. That's his responsibility and he keeps getting it done. Actually, you're helping him to get it done. Again, thank you. So we've been talking about why we are here as a church. What is our purpose of being here? And we've talked about three. You going to come back? Yeah, she didn't like this sermon when I gave it to her earlier. No, I'm just kidding. So anyway, we've been talking about our purposes as the church. And just to remind us, the very first thing that we come together at New Life Fellowship to do is to grow in God as individuals. We need to grow as individuals in our spiritual walk. The second one is to grow with one another. The Bible refers to us as a body. The Bible refers to us as an army. The Bible refers to us as a separate nation and country apart from everything else in the world. And to make all those things happen, we have to learn how to grow with one another. And then the third one that we're going to talk about today is to touch our world. And, when I think of touching the world, that every time I think of it, I kind of get intimidated by that idea. We got to touch the world. We got to do all these things. And I mean, the world is so large. Like, where do you start? There's so many things going on in our culture and in our lives around us. Where do you even start to touch our world? And it helped me one time to get a little perspective from the apostles, those men and women, those early disciples that began to follow Jesus. And here's why it helps me to think about them for perspective. I'm not sure if they ever really considered what would happen, but back in their day, they would try to after Jesus rose from the dead and they began to follow him, they began to write letters to one another, and they began to go tell their friends about what they had experienced with Jesus. And like the Apostle Paul, he wrote letters to a church in Philippi and a church in Corinth and a church in Ephesus and then church in Rome, and all of these letters that he was writing to those people. All the letters that Paul wrote and that Peter wrote and James and all the other apostles, I bet you they never once considered that thousands of years later we would have those writings and they would comprise our Bible. The very things that they wrote to their friends and loved ones in their day, the very efforts that they were using to touch the world, trickled all the way down thousands of years later to you and I, and now we use those letters in our Bible to guide us into how that you and I should act as men and women of God in our world today. And it was under the direction of the Holy Spirit that they did all this. And so they wrote to the people of their day to help them understand what Jesus had done and was doing. And now we have all of those things, and they're being used by us today. Now, here's my point in that. My point is that touching our world doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do these gigantic things. It doesn't mean you have to go to Africa on a missions trip. You can, that's okay. But that's not what touching our world is about. It doesn't have to be some far-reaching, all-encompassing work like a Billy Graham ministry or anything like that. I think as we begin to look at how we touch our world, we should make the goals a little bit easier for us to attain. And I think we should begin to learn how to touch our world by creating some small but realistic goals that we can do right now, right here, right around us. And we not only make those goals, but we work to do them. So I think the way we touch our world is very simply something you've heard me to say before. Let's just start by reaching the people that are around us. Let's just start to touch the people that God has put within our small little universe. If it was good enough for the apostles, why not us too? Let's start small and see where it goes from there. But maybe I need to back up, and maybe you've asked yourself already, why should I try to touch the world I live in? Why should I even bother to try? Now, right here, as a good sermon preparer, you're going to want to write this down, Keith, because I know you're preparing sermons. Right here is where we put in the obligatory Bible verse of why we're supposed to touch the world. Does anyone know what it is? What is the Bible verse that tells us that we're supposed to touch the world? John Lucarelli, do you know the answer to that? No. Very good. The answer is Mark 16:15. Mark 16:15, this is what it says. Jesus said to them, go into all the neighborhood, right? Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. Now that is the first line of response. Why should we touch the world? Well, Jesus told us to do it. That's called the Great Commission right there. That's how we refer to that. Somebody ever says, well, we're to follow the Great Commission. Now you know what that means. The Great Commission is Jesus saying to his disciples, go into all the world and preach the gospel, right? And so that's a challenge, and that's a mandate. Jesus didn't suggest it. He commanded that we go and do that. It was a challenge and a mandate that Jesus gave all his followers to change the world around them. And as you can see, there's very little ambiguity in that statement, right? Very little wiggle room. It's pretty plain and simple. And in and of itself, again, I think that can be a little bit intimidating. But I think it might help us a little bit if we think of touching the world like this. Well, I'm going to boast for a minute. Wednesday morning, I shot a buck. I know not all of you are hunters, and I know some of you, Aaron's like, ew. And so, but you know what I did after I shot that deer? One of the first things I did is I took a picture, right? And then I took a picture of me posing with the deer. Me smiling, a deer tongue hanging out on the side, right? And what did I do with that picture then? I showed it to people, right? Showed it to the guys at work. Hey, this is what I did this morning. Showed it to the guys at the Home Depot while I was paying for my stuff. Hey, this is something good happened, and I shared it with them. Isn't that what you do? Right? And so listen, when it comes to touching my world with the love of Jesus Christ, it's very simple. It really just boils down to is something good has happened to me through my relationship with Jesus Christ, and I want to share it with someone else that I see might need it. I'm going to share what has happened good to me through my relationship with God with others. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be fancy. It's just hey, look at this. I basically, when I talk to people about God, I just show them a snapshot of my life, of what God has done in my life at one particular moment. Hey, look at this. I know you're struggling with direction. One time I was struggling with direction, and God did this in my life. And it's just that little snapshot of something good that God did for me, right? That's what touching our world is all about. We can stop right now with the sermon. I know you want me to do that, but I'm not going to. But we could stop right now with the sermon if we could just understand that touching our world simply means to share with someone a snapshot of what God has already done in our lives. It's not high and mighty. It's not big and hard to understand. You know what? I was struggling. I needed hope. And God came in, and I don't know how he did it. I don't even know what he said. But I know that when he came inside, I had a hope that I didn't have before. I had strength that I didn't have before. Touching the world around you is not going to necessarily Africa or anything. It's simply showing someone that you care about a snapshot of your life. This is what God did for me. Hey, Kathleen. Swipe left, swipe left, swipe. This is what God did for me. That's touching the world. That really is touching the world. And that word touch, we use that word touch very specifically. And I like that word because it's not about grabbing. It's not about holding. Touch means to be deliberate but gentle. When you touch something, you're deliberate, but you're gentle. And that's how God wants us to treat other people. He wants us to touch them with the love and the compassion and the joy of God. Now, I want to show you some examples because there's some biblical examples. And you and I have read these things over and over again, but I don't think we ever necessarily have made a connection of how they relate to us now. And what we're going to look at is some of the verses. I think it's in Matthew. Is it Matthew or Mark, Tony? Can you see back there? Anyway, you're going to find them in a minute. And what they are is verses where Jesus touched someone and healed them. Okay, now they were physical healings. We're going to see that he touched a leper. We're going to see that he touched, I think, someone that was blind. And yeah, those were physical healings, but I think there's a pretty good correlation that we can relate to our lives right now. So to get an idea of what it meant when Jesus touched the world, let's take a look here. Where do we start? Well, how do we determine if we do it? Let's look at some of the things that Jesus did. Matthew 8:3. Jesus stretched out his hand and stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. When Jesus touched that leper and cleansed him, it's like when he touches us and cleans us of our sin and our guilt and all of the things that come with it. Do you know anyone that is suffering under sin and guilt right now? Do you know anyone like that? I can name a few. Look at this next one, Matthew 17:7. Jesus came to them and touched them and said, get up and don't be afraid. Get up and don't be afraid. And so in this verse, the disciples were overwhelmed with the fear of their circumstances. This is the one when they were in the boat, I believe, and the storm was waging around them. And they were overwhelmed with the circumstances they were in. Jesus came and he touched them and he gave them courage to go on. Do you know anyone that is overwhelmed by fear? They are terrified that this will happen in their life or that will happen in their life. They're terrified of sickness or divorce or homelessness or any. You know what? If you know someone like that, you can be Jesus in their life and touch them with a little bit of strength and encouragement and hope just by simply showing them a snapshot. You know, this is what God did for me in that circumstance, right? Matthew 20:34, moved with compassion, it starts out with in this verse. Moved with compassion, Jesus touched their eyes, and immediately they regained their sight and followed him. Jesus reached out and touched the eyes of someone that was blind. Let me ask you this. Do you know anyone just that you've talked to that this week they could really use some direction? They could really use some direction. They don't know. They've never had to navigate through these waters that they're in right now in their life, and they could really use some direction. They could really use some help to keep from stumbling blindly through the days ahead. What do they do next? Well, guess what? You have the opportunity in that circumstance to be Jesus to them, to reach out and touch them by showing through your words and your actions the right direction. Hey, Barb, I know you're struggling. This is what Jesus did that one time in my life when I didn't know what to do. I'm not really sure how he showed me, but somehow he led me through this mess that I was in my life. He led me through it, and I'll tell you what, I don't know if I would have made it through without God doing what he did. Anyway, I know you're struggling. I wanted you to see that right now. Just a snapshot of your life. That's all that is, right? Watch, I'm going to fall right here. How about that? Here we go. Matthew 8:15, another. Again, these are all examples of Jesus doing something physical, but they relate to our lives today. Matthew 8:15, he touched her hand. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and waited on him. When Jesus touched this particular person, this was Peter's mother. When Jesus got and touched this woman, she got up and began to work again. Now, you know what? When I read this, it reminds me of people in the church. There are sometimes we'll see people, they will serve so faithfully in the church, and they'll be there, they'll be lending help here, they'll be doing this, they'll be helping with that, and then something will happen, and they'll just be crushed by it, whether it's an outside issue or an inside issue, but they'll just get kind of this person that once seemed so strong, now they are spiritually, they're emotionally sick, they're emotionally or spiritually wounded, and they need some help. And that's exactly what Peter's mother was. And Jesus reached out and touched her. And when he reached out and touched her, he gave her the strength that she needed and the healing that she needed. Do you know that just the way that Jesus reached out and touched this woman, that he can reach out and touch you and I when we're struggling? Christians have a terrible problem. We like to shoot our wounded, as my one friend says. What's that? Yeah, well, yeah. We like to shoot our wounded rather than bolstering and encouraging and building people up that we know are weak. We have a tendency to distance ourselves from them. But that's not what Jesus did. I don't like to go to the hospital when people are sick. I'm always worried about germs. I love those antibacterial dispensers. Like, I get so much in my hand that's dripping on the floor, and I'm wiping my hands with them, and then I'll go and I'll talk to the people. And when I leave, the last thing I do before I walk out the door is get some more and put it all. I don't really like to go to the hospital. Are you like that? No, I don't really like to go to the hospital like that. But I know that when I go, that there's people there that need something that I can give them. I know when I go, there's people that need me to just talk to them a little bit and encourage them and let them know that I'm thinking about them. And they don't have to be in an actual hospital for us to have to see that. If we have brothers and sisters in our fellowship and we see they're struggling, let's reach out. Let's touch them. If we know that they've been so faithful and then suddenly they're not there, hello? Hey, what's going on? Everything all right? You see, Jesus reached out and touched this woman. This woman returned and began to serve. And so you and I have the opportunity to do that, to touch our world. If you know someone is wounded emotionally, spiritually, you can touch them with the love of Jesus. I like this next one. Mark chapter 10, verse 13. Got out of Matthew. Let's hop into Mark for a moment. And they were bringing children to him so that he might touch them. They were bringing the kids so that he might touch them. Do you know a child or a teenager that needs loved, needs encouraged, needs supported, needs directed, your kid or not? If you know someone like that, you can show them the love of God. You can touch the world by giving encouragement to that child. In these verses, Jesus was going out and touching the world around him, and he wants us to do the exact same thing. All of these verses, Jesus is just going. These aren't gigantic meetings. These aren't dynamic things. Jesus is just one-on-one in the world around him, and he's reaching out and touching people. Did you see it? That was the one thing that was constant. Jesus by himself, touching just this one person, touching that one person over there, doing this amazing work and literally changing the world around him everywhere he went. And you know what? He trained his disciples to do the same thing. Do you remember when Jesus first had all of the apostles join in the ministry and he began to send them out 2 by 2? And that's the one where he said, listen, don't take any extra shoes, don't take an extra coat. If they open their door to you, go ahead and stay there. If they don't open the door, shake the dust from your feet, keep moving, don't get hung up, just keep moving, do what I'm doing. Jesus was training them right then and there, one-on-one, to go out and touch the world. And then when Jesus died and rose again, and they all watched him go up to heaven, the 2 angels showed up when he was rising up into the air. They said, what are you doing standing here? What are you looking up in the sky for? Get to work, get busy, start doing what God has told you to do. Go out and touch the world. And that's exactly what they did. In Acts chapter 5, verse 12, it says, at the hands of the apostles, many signs and wonders were taking place among the people, and they were all in one accord in Solomon's portico. And Jesus had commissioned them to go out. He commissioned them to go out and represent him to other people. And guess what? They did it. And now he has commissioned you and I to go out and to represent him to other people. Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel. Great Commission, remember? Now, you may think to yourself, how can I possibly do anything spiritual like they did? How could I'm not an apostle. I've never had a miracle happen at my hand. I wouldn't even know how to make it happen if I could make it happen. How could I possibly do anything spiritual like that? Well, let's talk about that. what makes you and what makes me a good candidate to touch our world? What makes you just the right person to touch the world? What makes me just the right person to touch the world? The answer is very simple. The God who lives in your heart and the place that he has positioned you in your life. Do you want to know what qualifies you to reach the world, to touch the world with the love of Jesus Christ? God himself living in your heart and the position that you have in your life right now. That is what qualifies you. Dr. Joe Aldridge said this. He said, all souls are equally precious, but not all are equally strategic. And what that means is that God strategically places each of us in a specific place for a specific time to do a specific thing. Did I have that up there, Tone? Is that what that one says? Oh, no, it's not there. Okay, let me say it again because it's worth hearing again. God places each of us in a very specific place for a very specific time to do a very specific thing. I want you to think of it this way. If you are a parent, your missions trip, your mission time with your children is limited and finite. If you are a parent, your mission time is limited and finite. If you're an employee or an employer, your mission time with others you work with is limited and finite. If you're a spouse, your mission time with your spouse is limited and finite. And in the limited and finite time that you have, God has challenged you to reach out for the purpose of touching others with his love and advancing his kingdom. And we do that through, like I just said, showing a little snapshot of our lives. So God has put each of us in the place that he wants us to be for a very specific time. We have a window of opportunity. I remember when that was a really popular business term. We have to take advantage of this window of opportunity. Guess what? There's a window of opportunity for us to touch the world around us, to influence the people who are in the circle of our lives at any particular moment. Now, I want to back up even further. I want to give us like a bird's eye view or an eagle view of what is supposed to be happening in our lives. And so before Christ, BC, before Christ, you and I lived for ourselves. We were our own bosses. We were the quote-unquote kings of our lives, right? But if you ask Jesus to come into your heart, when he came in and set up residence, he asked you to change your allegiance from yourself to him, right? That's what we ask God. God, I want you to become the king of my life. And with that change of allegiance comes a change in the purpose and the direction of your life. That's what's supposed to happen. When I change my allegiance to make God boss, there's supposed to be a change in the purpose and the direction of my life that reflects me living for him. When we become children of God, at the very moment he begins to take our prior choices in life, and he takes the future moments of our life yet to come, and he takes those and he begins to shape them for good for ourselves, good for others, and for the kingdom of God. But within that process of the opportunities that he gives us, our time is limited and finite. Limited and finite, and our mission is critical, and therefore the choices that you make are critical as well. In other words, if you only have, as a parent, if you only have so much time to influence your child, the choices that you make within that window of opportunity are pretty critical. If there's so many years that you have to influence them the right way, and then you know they begin to listen to others, then your choices there are pretty critical. In your relationships with one another as husbands and wives, your influence on your spouse is critical. And so you have choices that you can make that are either going to help them get closer to God or not. What choices do you make in those circumstances? As an employer and as an employee, in both of those places, I've had to make decisions of how I'm going to live that are either going to help people see God through my words and actions or not. And unfortunately, I can say I've done both well. At times I represent God well, and at times I've represented myself. But those choices that you make are critical because our time in each place is limited and finite. And touching the world around us isn't very easy. You know, I don't know how long I'll be able to influence my family to follow God in their lives. I just know that the time that I have to do the best things that I can do to help that to occur because my time with them is limited and finite, and so is yours, right? I don't know how long I have to share days with my wife. We've been married 30 something years, maybe. Long time. Long time. And you know, I don't know how much longer we have together. I mean, I'm not dying. I'm not saying that. But I do know this, that the decisions I make towards my wife are limited and finite, and I need to do everything I can to help her to make sure that her journey to the kingdom of heaven is complete. I have to do what I can. You know what? I don't know how much time I have with you as your pastor or as my friends. I don't know how much time I have to point you towards life and towards health with God. I just know that I need to do the best that I can. All of my time on this earth is limited, and all of your time on this earth is limited, and all of us are placed here specifically and strategically so that we will purposely touch the world around us with the love of God. So when I stand here, I recognize that my time to influence you to follow God is short. Touching the world around us isn't easy. There are some real challenges, and here's what they are. I told you the method, right? Hey, here's a snapshot of my life. That's the method. But what's the problem? What stops us from doing that? What stops us from saying, hey, I see that you're struggling. Let me help you with this. Let me share this with. What stops us from doing that? There are two real challenges that I feel obligated to point out today, and they have to do with ourselves. If we are going to be God's people in this day and hour, then you and I have to learn how to embrace these marching orders from heaven to go out and spread the gospel. We have to embrace this thing called the Great Commission. And I think the very first challenge that we have to recognize that needs to be wrestled with is we have to learn how to shoulder our responsibility for the spiritual lives of those around us. We have to shoulder the responsibility for the spiritual lives of those around us. And here's why I say that. Because not only is my time limited, not only is my time finite, but I have said multiple times that it's very specific where God has placed us. It's very strategic where God has placed you in your life. And God has put specific people in our paths that we are to reach out and touch with His love for them. But for us to do that, we have to recognize our responsibility to get that information into their hand. I have to shoulder the responsibility of the spiritual lives of those around us. There's another challenge. We have to learn how to mature in our personal faith beyond seeing just our own needs. Now, this is a real struggle because when I first accepted Christ into my heart many years ago now, I was a broken man. I was a broken man. I was addicted to drugs. I was hopeless. I was loveless, and I was futureless. And I needed everything that God had for me. And I didn't really care, and I didn't really think about what others around me might have need. My walk with God was very, very self-centered. It was all about what God could do for me. Because that's what I needed in that time. I mean, I needed God. If God didn't show up, boy, I was really in trouble. But that made my walk with God, my personal relationship with God was very self-centered. I had very much tunnel vision. What can God do for me? And I didn't really pay much attention to anything else going on around me at that particular time. But you know, would it be any surprise to any of us here that God wants us to mature to the place where we recognize that the help that He gives us is also the help that He wants to give others? I had to learn that. I had to learn that the things that He was willing to do for me, He was willing to do for anyone. I mean, if He could love me, He could love anyone. And if He was willing to help me, He was willing to help anyone. And when I started to get that concept, that tunnel vision approach to my relationship with God, that self-centered, God, what are you going to do for me today? Oh, I need your strength today. I need this today. That my blinders opened up a little bit more to see more of the world around me. And as I started to look around me, and this is how I got into ministry, as I started to look around me, I started to see all these people that were dealing with the same thing that I was dealing with. And without knowing it, without recognizing what I was even doing, I would approach these people and I'd say, I see you struggling. This is what God did for me. It really helped me. I don't know if it can help you, but it helped me. It might be worth a try for you. And I would show them a snapshot of my life, of how God had delivered, and God had given strength, and God had given hope, and God had given forgiveness, and God had given me purpose and value and self-worth and all the things that I didn't have prior to meeting him. And I began to touch the world around me without even realizing what I was doing. I just saw that it wasn't just about me. And so, as a Christian who's trying to follow this thing called the Great Commission, one of the challenges that I have is recognizing now that I am spiritually responsible for others around me. I am wrong, right? The Bible says if you see someone cold and you don't give them your coat, there's a problem with that, right? If you see somebody thirsty and you don't give them a drink of water, there's a problem with that. If you see somebody hungry and you don't give them a piece of bread, there's a problem with that. You see, as we said last week, we are our brother's keepers. I am supposed to care for you. You are supposed to care for me. That's how this is supposed to work. That's what Jesus taught. And so I have to learn that I'm responsible for you spiritually. And you're responsible for someone else in your life spiritually. And then I have to wrestle with this thing called self-centeredness that I see inside of me all the time. All right, let's go on. So, we can be part of touching the world around us by overcoming these couple challenges. And in doing so, people you know and people you care about will experience the same love, power, hope, encouragement, and forgiveness that you enjoy. But it's all maybe small, What's the old saying? Rome wasn't built in a day, right? Rome wasn't built in a day. And I remember when I first went into ministry 18 years ago, whatever it was, I really thought, boy, I was going to change the whole world. That's what I thought. Boy, I got God's burning in my heart, and man, I got a message, and I'm gonna change the world. Now I recognize it. It's this one person here, and that one person over there who I can reach out and I can touch. It's this member of my family or that person in my workplace that God has given me the responsibility of touching them with the love of God. Am I changing the world? Yeah, actually I am. And if you're touching the world, you're changing it too. Am I changing the world? I think so. One person at a time, one moment at a time, one day at a time. And guess what? If I can do it, so can you. So can you. So our purpose is to touch the world for God. Just going to wrap things up here. So let's start doing it, huh? Right here in the middle of where God has placed you, I challenge you to begin to look around you. Look around you for that person that's struggling for direction, struggling for hope. Maybe they've hit the bricks and they're down on their luck and anything else. Look around. There's people that you know. You might have talked to them yesterday, maybe last week. Guess what? That's the person you can reach out and say, hey, let me show you what God did. I took this picture, right? Reach out and touch them. Reach out and touch them. And I want to give you one realistic goal to accomplish. For some of you, it's going to be easy. For others, it might be something new. But maybe each day in the coming week, I want you to take a moment. And I want you to purposely pray for someone that you know. Whoever that individual is that we've been talking about and they keep kind of going around in your thinking. A son, a daughter, a friend, a a coworker, an enemy, whoever it is. Just each day this week, lift them up in prayer. Each day this week, just take a moment and purposely pray for someone. It doesn't matter if you like them. It doesn't matter if you don't like them. All that it matters is you take a few moments and pray that God would touch them. And if you start to do that, you're going to start to take spiritual responsibility for their lives. That's a good thing. That gets rid of our first challenge. That helps to solve that first problem. Let's begin to take hold of that mission that God has placed in front of us. You know, right? The water's nice and still and beautifully calm, and you can take one little pebble and you can drop it in, and what happens? And don't say it sinks. Obviously it sinks. We know it sinks. What happens? What's that? You get that ripple effect, right? You have no idea, because you're not God and because I'm not God, you and I have absolutely no idea how far reaching just our one small action of touching someone's life can go. You have no idea because you just can't follow it out far enough. But God can.